welcome to this first episode of my story, which eventually I'll probably write in a book because I'm not sure how long I can account for YouTube holding a story I broadcast directly to my YouTube sites. Both of them. Oh, two of them. I don't know how many I have. Anyway, that's not my story, but I'm sticking to it. My story began in 2005, and I'll begin in sort of the beginning, but not the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. When I was visiting on my second 5150, the psychiatric facility of Palm Springs Hospitals, owned by Tenet, and I was in the office of Dr. Andrew Elliott. And while he was evaluating me, and I asked him these questions. What would it be worth to prove the existence of God? What would 999 years of justice and peace on earth be worth? What if I had insider information of unworldly proportions? To each question, of course, being trained as a shrink, Andrew Elliott nodded, and at the end of a short discussion, he declared that I was bipolar, to which I replied that I never get depressed. He says you don't have to get depressed to be bipolar. So he offered me the opportunity to stay voluntarily for 6 days on, I guess, a 5250, my first ever, or involuntarily for 14, and I selected the 6-day, quote-unquote, voluntary program. Well, I learned a lot there, including that the freaking place was bankrupted and not certainly making any money, as probably many psychiatric facilities don't do. They don't make much money for their hospitals. Intended as another question is the larger question is outside of the scope of this inquiry. But I do remember seeing a sign in the mental ward there that struck me. It said, "Be the author of your own life story." And quite coincidentally, that fit in with my plans because I'd already become the author of a new story. In fact, in my story, I'd become the king author of the future of Earth. So, from July 2005 till now, I have been a designated bipolar person, subject to mania. Fortunately, I don't really get depressed. Even in some quite, certainly in the last year, depressive situations, which is part of the broader story, but not subject to the beginning of the beginning of the end. And so really the beginning happened and it wasn't a biblical thing, and this isn't a biblical thing, except that, well, it is a biblical thing because of the future of Earth. Because you can't really get from where we are today to where we need to be without coexisting, without recognizing the religious heritage that actually plays into our story. Because from wherever your religion is, it's part of one story. It's part of one more massive Bible that we accept. And probably most of you would think it is blasphemy to think that the Bible of the Jews and the Bible of the Christians and the Bible of Islam are all part of one scenario, one Bible, let alone add in Buddhism and Hinduism or other variants, let alone add in science as part of really our Bible of our present, past, and future, because God ultimately was a scientist. And I don't want to get like really crazy into this, but as I got further and further into the inquiry into the proof of the existence of God, I knew I could prove he exists, but I could also prove God imaginary, that God doesn't exist. But through proving him imaginary and that he doesn't exist, he does exist. So that's a paradox of paradigms that, well, I'll just leave that for the philosophers among you. The point is, there is a God. He has a plan for us. Our plan is to save ourselves, not to wait to be saved. We have the power to save ourselves. A power I discovered in March, around March 1st, 2005. in the first 6 days, by the way, this is June 6th, 2012, 6622012, but in March 1st, 2005, I think I was on, well, within the first 6 days, I offered to buy, well, if I had the time, I would have offered to buy every company in the planet, but I start with the technology industry, all of them for 3 to 5 times. I didn't know, but I did have infinite money. Infinite money out of infinite mind. I had my mind around the future of technology, and I knew if we owned it all together, we could make more of it, make it better, faster, cheaper, with better standards for all of us, run a better world enterprise by, well, canceling nations, canceling states and counties, government, bureaucracies, turning it into one enterprise of us. I was onto that plan, and that's the plan that, well, I've been onto. And in fact, it's sort of weird because as the person that figures out a way to create a bank of all of us, canceling the nations, creating one nation of the world under God, you are on your way to creating infinite wealth. Not that wealth has anything to do with the prosperity of living and dying a life on earth, because that's really a more inner wealth that you'll discover. But put it aside, the wealth that we measure, the buildings, the wealth that we measure is wealth. We can build greater and higher if we share the wealth and grow it for all. And so my plan was to become an enterprise, a charitable enterprise owned by the people, for the people, of the people, and everything that I might invent or that we might invent together would be back to the people. And so I started inventing, I started creating, I started writing the story. But what is a story when all you needed to know was if we bought ourselves out together, we bought ourselves all of our, taking all our public companies private, because you couldn't take the world into the domain that I was describing, a domain where all of us together are coexisting under one God, without canceling nations as we know it. And you really couldn't do that, actually, even though I tried to set up a California corporation with Richard Romer, who actually once owned the screenplay rights to Atlas Shrugged, which was my fictional Bibles of this story, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. But what if, imagine that Ayn Rand had known God, and, well, then she would have figured out that John Galt was played wrong. She would have found Will Galt, who didn't strike from the world, Will Galt, who rose to the challenge and called all the Atlases out to become Atlas together, working not because they had to for the people, but because they wanted to, because what happened to grow the wealth of the people would be the best way to grow their own legacy and their own net present value on earth. It's the branding of the brands, the super brand, brand zero. Zero conquers any number, multiplied and divided, followed by one. And 1 and 0 are the numbers of God. I can prove them. 0 is the number of Jesus. 0 is the number of woman. 1 is the number of man. See, it's a paradigm of paradoxes. 01 is how all your computers work, and I declared 01s to be a derivative work of God, and therefore all your computer programs are derivative works of me and God. And that gets to be an interesting patent law paradigm, but let's not even go there. The point was, the people could buy themselves another future, and if the top knew they could buy themselves out, well, we could build our own miracle. We needed to build our own Judgment Day. That's why when I offered Arnold Schwarzenegger 1.5 times the value of California, I was giving him a deal. 3 to 5 times a negative number would be much greater. 1.5 times 500 million, billion, to buy out a negative state with promise
Well, it was a good deal. He'd owe me $250 billion. I'd pay off California's debt and merge it with the enterprises and then merge it with China and India, and there would be no choice but for the United States of America and the other states to succeed from the Union and join China and India and join Europe and join all the nations of Earth with one common currency, backed by all the gold, backed by all the oil, backed by all the coal we keep in the ground. We own our own earth. We own our own environment. We own the Amazon, with Brazil, of course, as our shepherding as an asset of the world, as our oxygen lungs. See, we need to own the world together so that we don't rape our world alone. And long story, started getting the voices. I can go back to normal. I'm normally normal, but sometimes these ideas make me crazy. And I guess for the many years I must accept, and I often do accept for many periods of time, that I am just an insane man in a so-called sane world. Not the only sane man in an insane world. But when I offered to buy California, I said we must be able to buy out Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and retire them on a desert island. Leave that judgment day up to God. Give them redemption on our earth. Let's have peace, because it would be cheaper to buy them out. Well, then define them. I'm sure it was cheaper. But further than that, well, we could take them out with their own code against murder, for it says in the Quranic view of the 10 Commandments, for one person to murder one innocent person, it is as if you murdered all mankind. There's no way a Muslim could murder and kill and be a Muslim, let alone be innocent. The jihad, the holy jihad, is a jihad of mind. The only war we're ever worth fighting for is the war to end all wars. And the only war to end all wars is a war of no war. A war against war. An end of the war. Turn the swords into plowshares and deliver 999 years of justice and peace on earth. Turn your sixes into nines. It can happen. It will. It already maybe has. That's one of my realities. Could it be yours? Of an out. To the next one. Episode 1. My story.